And who doesn't love a good Christmas tree? That's a staple at this time of year. When the tree goes up, you know that it's Christmas time. Except for those of you who put up your tree right after Halloween, that does not count. But the Christmas tree has become an event, hasn't it? We set aside a day to put it up or to decorate it. I mean, Christmas tree lightings for cities have turned into TV specials and concerts, like New York City and the Rockefeller Center tree. I think is legit. I mean, who doesn't love that tree? So here's my question. Is there a better symbol or is there a better iconic symbol for Christmas than a Christmas tree? I mean, Christmas is referred to as the season of perpetual hope. So is a Christmas tree the best symbol for it? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe the best symbol for the season of perpetual hope is actually a tree stump. Now let me explain. We got to go back about 700 years before the very first Christmas. There was this guy named Ahaz, and he was the king of Judah. He lived in Jerusalem, and Ahaz was a messed up dude. I mean, because it's Christmas, I'm not going to tell you some of the things that he did, but just think of the most deplorable and evil things you can think of. And Ahaz was probably worse than that. I mean, God's people had continued to run away from God. They continued to reject Him. And for generations, God was trying to get their attention, trying to get them to come back to Him. He sent them prophet after prophet to try to get the people to listen, but they wouldn't. And then they had king after king that would lead them even further and further away from God. It was just going downhill quickly. When Ahaz was on the throne, these three other kings decided, you know what? Let's come together. Let's attack Ahaz because we can conquer his kingdom. Then we can put our own puppet king on his throne. Let's do that. So these three kings get their kingdoms together and they decide, here's what we're going to do at first. We're going to try to scare Ahaz. We're going to try to scare the people in Jerusalem. And we're just going to have these targeted little attacks just to freak them out. They started off with terrorism. That's what they were doing. And it worked because Ahaz and the people of Jerusalem, they were scared out of their minds. So Ahaz goes to the king of Assyria and he says, hey, you got to rescue me. You got to help me out. You got to save me. At the time, Assyria, this was the world superpower. I mean, these were people that did some pretty messed up things, but they were the military giant in the world at that time. And Ahaz says, come help me out. Come rescue me. And if you do that, I pledge to be your servant. So what he's doing is he's basically aligning himself with Nazi Germany. Not only that, he says, you know what, I'm going to pay you. And he takes all this gold and silver and he pays it to the king of Assyria. Where he got that gold and silver, he took it out of the temple in Jerusalem, God's temple. This money that people gave as an offering, as an act of worship to God, Ahaz takes it for himself and then gives it to the king of Assyria as payment. On top of that, he decides, you know what? I really like the Assyrians. I want to be like the Assyrians. I want to mimic them. So he starts off and he just rips out all of the altars out of the temple in Jerusalem. He says, forget it. I'm not going to do what you've said, God. I'm going to put in the altars exactly the same ones that the Assyrians have because I want to worship their false gods. I want to worship the way they do things. Basically, what he's saying to God is, forget you, God. That's how he's living his life. That's how he's leading. He's saying, hey, I don't need you. I don't want you. And we can do the exact same thing. Depending on how we live our lives, we may or may not be saying to God, hey, I don't need you. I don't want you. And if I'm God at this point in the story, if people continue to reject me and walk out on me and keep living in lives of sin, turning their back on me, if I'm God in this story, all right, fine. I'm going to turn my back on you. I'm going to walk away. I might even root against these people. But that's not what God did. Because God still cares about them. God still loves them. God still wants them. So he sends a prophet to try to warn them that, hey, you guys are heading towards disaster. I mean, God did this over and over again. He would try to get the people's attention by telling them, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's the truth. Here's how much I love you. You need to turn from this. So he sends this guy named Isaiah, who is probably the most famous prophet in the Bible. And being a prophet wasn't necessarily a great job. When we hear, oh, that person's a prophet, we think, wow, that's a pretty big deal. That person's probably pretty legit. But back then, it wasn't a great job. The job description was this. You're going to have to tell hard truth to people about what God is saying to them, still have compassion on them, even though you want to kind of smash your head into a wall, knowing that they're probably not going to listen to you at best, and at worst, you might get killed for this. And sign me up for that job. I mean, being a prophet was not high on the job list at career day. But God sends Isaiah, and Isaiah goes to King Ahaz. He meets him in Jerusalem, and he says to Ahaz, and he says to the people, hey, you guys keep walking away from God. You keep turning your back on him. You keep rejecting him. You keep living in this life of sin. You're doing these evil and wrong things that these other countries are doing. And what you're doing is you're saying, you know what, God, I don't need you and I don't want you. So here's what's going to happen. Because you continue to reject God, because you continue to walk away from him, because you continue to live this life full of sin, God's going to let you have what you want. He's going to back away. And when he backs away, what's going to happen to you, he's going to let it happen. I mean, you think you're friends with these other nations? Like you think that you guys are buddies? You think that they're going to help you? You think that they're going to care about you? But they don't care about you at all. They just want to exploit you. They're going to exploit you. And then one day, they themselves are going to be destroyed. So when that happens, who's going to save you now? And not only are they going to be destroyed, so are you. One day, people here are going to die. And the very few survivors that there are going to be taken into exile. Isaiah says that, hey, God's people and all of their so-called allies are about to get cut down. And then all this stuff that Isaiah says actually happens. It comes true. Like, Merry Christmas, right? But he does give some good news. He says to God's people, he says, hey, after that happens, after you get cut down, out of the stump of David's family will grow a shoot. Yes, a new branch bearing fruit from the old root. Isaiah's talking about Christmas. He's talking about Jesus coming. David's family. This is David and Goliath, King David, the greatest king in the history of Israel. David's family is God's people. And Isaiah says once they are cut down to a stump, when it seems like there is no more hope, out of that stump is going to come new life. Isaiah is talking about how Jesus is going to come from what seems like this useless stump, and he's going to come and he's going to bring new hope. This is a promise of hope. He's going to bring peace. He's going to bring joy. He's going to bring new life, new growth, new opportunity. All of this is going to come from what seems like a useless tree stump. And then he goes on and Isaiah says, hey, Jesus is going to be like this. A child is born to us, a son given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, not the other way around. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor. That's awesome. He's going to be called Mighty God. He's going to be called Everlasting Father. He's going to be called a Prince of Peace. Isaiah is saying that Jesus is going to come out of this seemingly useless stump. And great things are going to happen. This is the first piece of good news that comes from Christmas. Greatness can come from things that seem like they've been cut down. Greatness comes from things that have been cut down. And that's true in our everyday lives, and that is more than true with God. Man, greatness can come when things just get cut down, when there looks like there is no hope. And Jesus comes to bring hope. And Isaiah says, this stump that I'm talking about, it's going to bring a promise of redemption. Man, Jesus is going to redeem all of the brokenness that is in our world. Back then when Isaiah was talking, and right now also in 2020, he's going to redeem all of this. This stump that Isaiah is talking about is a promise of purpose. You're being given an invitation to be on Jesus' mission, to live a life that has eternal purpose, where you can be a part of reconciliation and the restoration of our world, where you can be a part of people's lives transforming just by blessing one person at a time. The promise that comes out of this stump that Isaiah is talking about is eternal life. Yes, there is physical death, but if you are in Jesus and Jesus is in you, then you have eternal life. These are the promises that are coming out of this stump that Isaiah is talking about. And then he goes on and he talks about Jesus even more. He says, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and might. The Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. I mean, would you want anything else to be true about your God? This stuff's awesome. And the great news is that if you are a follower of Jesus, the same Spirit of the Lord is in you. You can have these things too. This is one of the other promises and gifts that come from Christmas. So in times of just utter foolishness and when it seems like people are losing their minds, is that not this year? Well, then you can have wisdom and understanding. You can be a voice of wisdom and understanding. When things are confusing and things like are just breaking left and right because they're weak, you can have real answers and you can have strength. You can give counsel and strength to people. When it seems like there are no solutions and there are more problems and nobody knows the answer to anything, and when it seems like people have become their own gods, and you can have real knowledge. You can have real strength. You can have real understanding to pass on to other people. You can have real loyalty to the one true God. This is the promise that Jesus is making. Isaiah says, hey, one day out of this stump, when everything seems like it's been cut down, greatness is going to come. Hope is coming. Peace is coming. Jesus is offering reconciliation, redemption, relationship with Him, who is God. Jesus is God. He's offering you a relationship with Him. He's offering you purpose, a life that not only will have meaningful impact on other people, but also the world. He's offering eternal life. So the hope of Christmas is not symbolized by a Christmas tree. According to Isaiah, it's symbolized by a tree stump. So when you look at your Christmas tree the next time, picture it cut down to a stump, because that's where hope is. Hope does not start with a massive tree. Hope starts with a tree stump. So Christmas is really two different things. The first thing that it is it's an opportunity to be grateful for tree stumps. So when stuff gets cut down in your life, you don't have to worry about it anymore, because it just means that's an opportunity to be hopeful about something. In fact, the more things that get cut down in life, the more tree stumps you see, all the more things to be grateful for. In fact, 2020, there's been so many things that have been cut down in our lives, right? There are tree stumps around all of us, which means right now, this year, we have more to be grateful for. We have more to look forward to. We have more to be hopeful about than we have in any of the years in the past. Like this year, for instance, our sense of security and safety, that's been cut down. It's been gone. That's a tree stump right now. So for the last 30 years, this is why we should be grateful for this. For the last 30 years or so, we have been the first people in the history of mankind to assume safety. Like, we have assumed that we can always be safe. And if we assume that we can always be safe, anything that threatens that safety is going to be a source of great fear. Well, we can't always be safe. There are plenty of things that threaten our safety. So if we just assume we can always be safe, then we're always going to live in fear, because we're going to be afraid of things that threaten that safety. But that's been cut down this year. That assumption that we can be safe is gone, and we should be grateful for that, because now we know that that's not true, and we can live in real freedom now. We can live in real faith. We don't have to be chained down by fear anymore. We should be grateful for that. Something else that's been cut down this year has been our community and our relationships. We've been isolated for so long. We've been separated for months now that, man, we have just lost human interaction. We've lost human connection. And the growth that can come out of that is that from now on, we won't take interaction and relationships for granted anymore. Being in community with other people, pushing relationships aside that maybe we have in the past, and I miss those greatly. We're not going to take that for granted anymore, being engaged with other people. Technology is amazing and it's a gift, but it does not replace face-to-face interaction. There's something about how God has wired us that we need to be in connection, physical connection with each other. We'll be grateful for that now. I think after this pandemic is over, when we get through this, you're going to see a new premium put on community, and I'm grateful for that. Or maybe you've lost your job, and that's terrifying. It just got cut out from underneath you, and now that's a massive tree stump in your life. You don't know what's going to happen next, but maybe God's going to do something great out of that, something that you can't even imagine right now, and there's no way He would have done it unless your job would have got cut out from in front of you. So that's a tree stump that you can be grateful for. Or what about school? If you're a senior in high school, this is not the way your senior year is supposed to go, right? It feels like you're missing out on different things that might not happen next year. But God might be doing something great in this that you'll get to experience that no other class ever has got to experience. Or maybe you're a parent that's got elementary kids at home and you're doing e-learning right now and you just want to pull your hair out because it's hard. But God can do great things in this that can build resilience into our kids that maybe we never would have had that opportunity unless this got cut down right in front of us. And the point is this, what Isaiah is saying is that the promise of Christmas is that no matter what gets cut down in your life, Jesus can bring new life and new growth. So what tree stumps in your life right now do you need to be grateful for? Things that have been cut down. Maybe they desperately needed to be cut down. Or maybe it was something good. Regardless of what it is or regardless of the circumstances, it's an opportunity to bring new growth. Christmas promises that a stump is never just a stump. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for something greater. Jesus brings great hope out of things that look like stumps. Jesus brings new life and new opportunity from things that have been cut down. So Christmas gives you the opportunity to be grateful for those things. The second thing it is, Christmas is an invitation to look at your roots. Whenever we see a tree, we usually look straight at the trunk first, right? If you've ever seen the redwoods or the giant sequoias, your eye immediately goes to those tree trunks. They're massive. You can drive a car through them. They're that big. Or maybe you focus on the branches. Or if it's a tree that has fruit, our eyes definitely go to the fruit. All of those things are great. They're great things. But those aren't the most important part of a tree. The most important part of a tree is the part you can't see. It's the roots. Growth or lack of growth comes from the unseen. And the same thing is true for you and I. Growth or lack of growth comes from what we can't see. Comes from underneath. And Isaiah says that this branch is going to come up and it's going to bear fruit because it's connected to the old roots. The same thing is true with you and I. When things get cut down in life, that's an invitation to look at what you're really rooted in, because if you want to see any kind of future growth, if you want to see any kind of fruit in your life, you got to have good roots. So the question is, what are you rooted in? All of us are digging our roots down deep into something. What are you rooted in? Meaning, what have you put your trust in? What are you really worshiping? Are you rooted in the economy or money? Well, when there's a huge economic downturn like this year, being rooted in money is a bad idea. Money is a horrible source of strength because you can have it 1 minute and it can be gone the next, just gone. Or maybe you're rooted in health or your safety. Like you're putting your trust in your health. Now, we should live healthy lives, absolutely. But to be rooted in that, something that can be gone in a moment, that's a bad idea too. In all of my years of ministry, the oldest person I've done a funeral for is 34 years old. Again, we should live healthy lifestyles, but to put our trust, to root ourselves in our health, something that can be gone in a moment. And even when you're the healthiest person you know, you're asking for trouble. Or do you root yourself in politics? I don't think I need to explain this one, but if you root yourself in politics, something that constantly changes, something that is going to frustrate you, something that absolutely will fail you eventually, you're asking for disaster. I mean, we root ourselves in politics now. We worship it, whether that's a political party or identity politics. That's become bigger and bigger. We worship politics. We worship all different kinds of things. Like, what do you worship? Like, what do you really worship? Well, Matt, I believe in God and I go to church. That's great. That's awesome. I'm glad you do. Me too. But I still got to check myself. Is that really what I worship? Is Jesus really who I worship? Like, if you really want to know what you're rooted in, follow the trail of what you worship. Do you worship work? Do you worship your job? Well, no, I hate my job. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't worship it. Worshiping something isn't just raising your hands up and singing about it. Worshiping something is what you put your focus on, what commands your emotional and mental attention. That could be your job, even if you don't like it. If it's driving all of your attention, if it's controlling your focus, you're worshiping it. Or do you worship your spouse or your kids? I mean, those are gifts. Our spouses, our kids, those are absolute great gifts. But if our lives revolve around our kids or revolve around our spouse, we're worshiping them. Kids are a gift, but they're a terrible God. Or do you worship a good time? You're always looking for the next thing. You're living for the weekend. You're looking for the next adventure. How can I have fun? What's my next vacation? That stuff is great. It's absolutely great. But if it drives my attention, if it controls my focus, if it charges me emotionally more than anything else, I'm worshiping those things. I mean, we should enjoy things. We should have hobbies. We should recreate. That comes from God. That's a gift from God. But if we worship it, man, that's a problem. We live in a state that has so many opportunities for recreation. But do you know what the number one false god in Colorado is? Recreation. People spending time outside. I partake in all of it. I love it. But if that drives my focus, if all of my energy is around that, if I live for that, I'm worshiping it. Now, what do you really worship? Another way to tell what you're rooted in is if you become disillusioned with things in your life, if you feel empty, if you feel like there's some despair, if you go into times of dislike, self-dislike, or even self-loathing, man, if you're riding the emotional roller coaster in your life, you know, the highs and lows of your emotions are always changing. That's probably a pretty good indication that you are rooted in someone or something other than Jesus. Like, where do you get your security? Where do you get your confidence for the future? Where do you learn your coping mechanisms? If your confidence and your security for the future, if that comes from politics, if it's rooted in the economy, if it comes from your hobbies, what happens when all that stuff gets cut out from underneath you? Like, what are you going to do then? Are you rooted in those things? Are you rooted in something that won't change? Jesus is the same yesterday, He's the same today, and He's the same tomorrow. He's the only thing that doesn't change. So what are you really rooted in? Ephesians 3:17 says, Christ will make His home in your hearts as you trust in Him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong. And may you have the power to understand, as all of God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep His love is. May you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and the power that comes from God. What you're rooted in matters. It matters. So what are you really rooted in? Are you rooted in Jesus? Or are you rooted in something else? Man, Christmas is an opportunity to look at what you're really rooted in. Am I rooted in the wrong things? Am I rooted in things that will fail, that cannot bear fruit in my life? Am I rooted in the ways of the world that are only going to disappoint me and leave me hanging? Or am I rooted in Jesus? Am I rooted in His church? Am I rooted in His word? And am I rooted in His mission and His purpose for my life? Christmas is an invitation to look at what you're rooted in. It's also an opportunity to be grateful for the tree stumps of life, because remember, with Jesus, a stump is never just a stump. It's an opportunity for new life. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for something greater that you and I, we probably can't even imagine. That's the promise of Christmas. It's an invitation to focus your life completely on Jesus. Everything about your life is centered on Him, not the other way around. And that's where hope comes from. That's where our growth comes from. That's where fruit in our lives come from. That's where you will find joy and peace. That's the promise of Christmas. Merry Christmas, guys. And let's close out by singing one more song, because we have so much to be hopeful for. We have so much to be grateful for.